Hi, I'm Ann Kim, a senior editor at the Washington Monthly, and today I'm speaking with monthly senior editor Phil Longman and editor Gillian Tenner Martin. They have co-authored a piece in the latest issue of the Monthly titled "How Democrats Can Save Social Security and Win Elections." Hey guys.
Hey, Anne, thanks for
Yeah.
having us.
All of us know sort of in the back of our minds that Social Security is in huge trouble. But Gillen, can you remind us just how dire the situation is? And in particular, how the GOP's big, beautiful bill passed over the summer made things even worse?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said, this is not new news. We've known that Social Security is approaching a crisis for years, decades. And each year, the administration comes out with an annual report that shows us how close to that go broke, that insolvency date we're getting. So, this June, they released a report that showed that we're a little over 7 years away from that. In 2033 is the date that benefits would be predicted to be cut if we do not do anything. And the next month, in July, Trump passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which you spoke to after Congress passed it and Trump signed it in July. And that bill drained an additional 168 billion from the trust funds by reducing the amount of income tax that affluent recipients pay on their benefits. So after that passed and after the effects to Social Security were calculated, it was predicted that that triggered benefit cut in 2033 would rise to a full 24% around. So the average recipient would be receiving nearly a quarter less in monthly benefits if something isn't done. And for a
Wow.
typical couple, typical dual earning couple, that would look like around $18,000 per year.
So it's not just Social Security that's in bad shape. A lot of Americans approaching retirement age are utterly unprepared for this looming crisis. You guys cite, for instance, that according to the Federal Reserve's most recent survey of consumer finances, which it takes every 3 years, 2022, the most recent numbers say that 43% of households on the threshold of retirement, that's ages 55 to 64, had zero retirement savings, like nothing. And among those 65 and over, more than half had none. So what kind of hardship are we looking at if there isn't a fix?
Yeah. So, I mean, starting with the people who are currently on Social Security right now, there's a reason why the majority of Democrats and Republicans alike, the vast majority, stand really firm against any sort of cut to Social Security. And that's because it would have really dire impacts on our seniors and our soon to be seniors in America today. So, for example, we know that 27% of beneficiaries this year relied on Social Security for over 90% of their monthly income. And this is sort of at odds with a lot of the news stories we see about the boomer generation, the generation retiring over this decade, being the wealthiest generation in history, because a lot of these folks have not been invested in real estate or in the stock market that's produced such incredible returns over the last few decades. In fact, we know that people over 50 today, who used to make up around 11% of the population of America's homeless population in the early 1990s, the fastest growing segment of our unsheltered population, making up nearly half. So we sort of have to square that reality of, yes, the wealthiest generation in history, but also our seniors today are in real trouble. And as you said, it's not just those that are already retired, it's those that are on the borderline of retirement. And I think that when we take into account the downward mobility a lot of Americans have seen over the last few decades, as well as the affordability crisis that Americans face today, it makes sense that some folks haven't had enough to stock away. Today, about half of Americans say they're living paycheck to paycheck, and needless to say, if you're worried about putting food on the table today or paying rent, it's hard to stock money away for tomorrow.
Yeah. Phil, turning to you, how on earth did we get into this mess? You guys' piece chronicles the history of failed attempts at Social Security reform in quite a lot of detail, but why has Social Security been so hard to fix over decades? And what have been the big turning points, I guess, that have gotten us to where we are now?
Well, a big turning point was in 1983 when the system was basically running out of money for a variety of reasons. One was uh, vastly expanded benefits. Congress had increased Social Security by 20%, added cost of living adjustments. Another was falling birth rates, that becoming evident the baby boom generation wasn't going to have as many kids as their parents did. Another one was just the beginnings of the stagnation of the economy. So it wasn't growing as much as people had planned. So at that point, the system just flat out ran out of money. They made a big compromise between raising taxes and cutting benefits. What they did is that the young people at the time were going to raise your taxes and cut your benefits, which they did, which is part of the reason why the retirement age is much higher for younger people today. It's supposed to create a surplus of money that would help to pay for the baby boom generation when it came time to retire and for future generations as well. So we taxed ourselves more than was actually needed to meet current benefits. The money was supposed to go into a kind of metaphorical lockbox where it would be available today. But sadly, instead, both parties basically spent the money in the lockbox. It, in effect, went to finance various general government deficits that we ran, first to finance the Reagan tax cuts and arms buildup, then for assorted wars in the Middle East, and most recently for another tax cut for rich people. So all of that has basically been squandered. And so, but now that we need the money in the lockbox, turns out the lockbox is empty.
Great. But you do have a solution for this, and I want to ask about that. You write in your piece, quote, "The fiscal outlook for Social Security may be precarious, but it also presents a huge opportunity. It's possible to save Social Security without raising taxes on the working class while also providing the system with the revenues it needs in ways that will make Americans healthier and more productive."
Yeah.
How do you guys propose doing that?
Well, we're facing a lot of emergency catastrophes in our time, but this is one that we can solve. It's not that crazy hard to fix this. The first thing we need to do is to expand the tax base, in particular, expand it in a way that makes our affluent, well-off people bear a larger burden of the cost of an aging society. So one easy way to do that would be just to not just tax labor as we do now to fund Social Security, but tax returns on capital. So dividends, capital gains, rents, other. And this is where most rich people get most of their money is from returns on money. And yet Social Security, all of that is completely exempt from Social Security taxes. So by expanding the tax base to cover financial returns, that gets an awful lot of it done. It's also possible to finance it through taxing things that should be taxed anyway, right? Like we've got way too much plastic in the world. How about a tax on plastic, right? To raise a lot of money because we've got a lot of plastic in the world. And you don't need a big tax on plastic to raise a lot of money. So just thinking creatively, whether it's carbon or other things that we should be taxing for other reasons. And then finally, again, about how we got here, part of it was squandering the money in the lockbox, but also it's a consequence of a set of neoliberal policies that both parties pursued over the last 40 years that made, the top 10% of the population quite well off, but kind of immiserated everybody in the bottom 60%. So that's why we have this huge concentrated crisis of retirement affordability among working class people, is that we took policies that eroded our industrial base, that deregulated banking and deregulated gambling, deregulated other kinds of forms of predatory lending that that basically wiped out the balance sheets of millions of Americans. So getting back to a world in which we protect people from predation by financiers would actually be a very important thing to do to solve this thing in the long term.
Terrific. Well, thank you guys for your time. I'm Ann Kim, a senior editor at the Washington Monthly, and I have been speaking with the monthly senior editor Phil Longman and editor Gillian Tanner Martin about their piece, How Democrats Can Save Social Security and Win Elections. Take care, guys. Thanks again.
Thanks, Anne.